watching the Sun News Network August Long Weekend Special. We're hanging out, having some snacks, and we're looking back at some of your favorite shows from The Source and Byline over the last few months.
Well, one of the things that Ezra and I fight for a lot, in fact, it's how we met, is freedom of speech. And we met over the fight against Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. Well, we scored a victory back in June when that was repealed. That doesn't mean the fight's over, but let's take a look at the victory lap. A victory for free speech. That's the topic of tonight's Byline. Sometimes dramatic changes, they happen in the still of the night or when no one's watching. Yesterday, a few in Canada noticed that a dramatic change had occurred, and it happened in the Senate. While most people who even noticed that the Senate was still sitting were, well, either celebrating or denouncing the vote to gut Bill 377, the Union Transparency Bill, well, another vote happened, one that restored a touch of our freedoms. I'm talking about Bill C-304, an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act. It passed third and final reading in the Senate after languishing there for more than a year. This is the bill that repeals the dreaded Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. That's the soon-to-be former law that made it an offense to post something online that was likely to expose an identifiable group to hatred or contempt. For everyone that hasn't been following this from the beginning, I want to stress that part. Likely to expose. Likely to expose an identifiable group to hatred or contempt. Now, first off, hatred and contempt, those are feelings. You can't legislate against feelings, so the law was always silly. Secondly, likely to expose? That meant you didn't actually have to expose anyone to these feelings through your posting. You just meant that whatever you said, wrote, sang in an internet posting that could theoretically expose a protected group to hatred or contempt, well, you broke the law. And as we saw time and again through prosecutions undertaken by the federal human rights apparatus, there didn't even need to be a complaint from anyone in the protected group to see you prosecuted. Section 13 of the Human Rights Act was an affront to free speech. It was an affront to due process. It was an affront to logic and the rule of law. It will soon be gone. The bill received royal assent last night. It comes into force a year from now. Now, progressives who've never met a freedom they wouldn't take away from you, well, they were apoplectic online yesterday when I broke the news on Twitter. They claimed repealing Section 13 will mean it's open season on Aboriginals, on minorities, and that genocide won't be far off. Nonsense. All of it. It's still a crime, according to the criminal code, the real law, to incite violence. This change merely repeals thought crime legislation. This was a long time coming. I'm not just talking about the passage of the bill, which took far longer than it should have, but I'm primarily talking about the hard work of ordinary citizens who called and emailed their MPs going back years to denounce this. I was shocked when I realized how long this has been going on. I started covering the issue in late 2007, early 2008. That's when the push to repeal Section 13 started. And it started because of an attempt to shut down Mark Steyn. Stein's book, America Alone, had been excerpted in the website of Maclean's magazine, and a group of young Muslim activists, radicals in my view, didn't believe in freedom of expression, and they wanted Maclean's and Steyn punished. They complained to the Canadian Human Rights Commission as well as several provincial ones. That alerted people to what was happening, that you could be prosecuted for writing your thoughts down. But the truth was that this sort of thing had been going on for years. Average people knew that, well, this was wrong and had to be stopped, and they knew that long before our political leadership did. We should thank Brian Storseth, the MP who finally put this bill forward to get it done, and we should remember the contributions of Senator Doug Findlay, who was a champion of free speech. He sponsored this bill in the Senate, but he unfortunately died before he could see it passed. Former Liberal MP Keith Martin deserves credit as well. He raised the issue in the Commons years ago, and he was denounced as a racist, a white supremacist, and worse. Martin, who has East Indian ancestry, actually laughed it all off as he just said, "I'm just a brown guy." Our own Ezra Levant and our friend Mark Steyn played a big role in keeping this issue alive, and they deserve so much credit for what they did. I'm proud of the small part that I played in this ordeal. For the longest time, I was the only member of the press gallery filing stories on the issue, the only one going to committees, the only one hounding Chief Commissar Jennifer Lynch, and the only one bothering to ask the Prime Minister, or any cabinet minister for that matter, about problems with the law. It was tough, but it was worth it. I have to say the biggest credit, though, has to go to the bloggers, the activists, the thousands of regular people who took a stand for freedom of speech in Canada, even as bureaucrats derided that ideal as, and I quote, an American concept. Specifically, I should mention small dead animals, 5 Feet of Fury, Blazing Cat Fur, and Binks, the web elf, for pushing this story. Love their names, too. There were many others out there that did a ton of work on this, but we just can't mention them all. This story shows that with determination and dedication, we can push back against the giant, ever-growing state that, if given a chance, would wipe away all our freedoms. The people can win when the people stand. That's a valuable lesson we should never forget. And that's the byline.
Something has gone badly wrong in the Canadian state's conception of human rights. Until last month, Section 13 had a 100% conviction rate. Even Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-il understood that you don't want to make the racket look too obvious. Under Section 13, citizens are subject to lifetime speech bans, not in the Soviet Union, not in Saudi Arabia, but in Canada.
That's why we love Mark Steyn, because he puts it all on the line just like that. Look, Section 13 will soon be gone. That doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels. Someone emailed me after they heard about Section 13, said, what about the comedian and the $15,000? Well, that was a provincial human rights racket that decided that case. And in so many areas, it's the provinces that we need to focus. We need to keep pushing back because free speech is under attack around the world, not just here at home in Canada, but around the world. And that includes not so great Britain. Britain used to be great. It hasn't been in a long time, and it's in a slide. Yesterday got the news that Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch, had been banned from even entering Britain over what he has said and written in the past. Robert Spencer joins us now via Skype. Mr. Spencer, what did you say that has the British government so upset that they won't even let you into the country?
Well, Brian, I have their letter right here, and what they quote me as saying is, the quote is kind of garbled, and I don't think I could have said it this way, but they quote me as saying that Islam is a religion and a belief system that mandates warfare against unbelievers for the purpose of establishing a societal model that is absolutely incompatible with Western society. Now, that is not only a true statement, but it's something that Muslims themselves say very frequently. Muslim leaders, for example, Muhammad al-Arisi, who is a Muslim cleric from Saudi Arabia, recently said that jihad means the smashing of skulls and the tearing off of the limbs of the infidels. And interestingly enough, he just was in London last week. He got in with no difficulty. So what the lesson here is that you can actually talk about violent jihad in England as long as you're for it. If you're against it, no way.
You have been portrayed as an anti-Muslim, anti-Islam bigot. Is that a fair description of you, or would you say that's not the case?
No, it's not in the least, not remotely the case. You know, Pamela Geller and I, my colleague with whom I was going to travel to England, and we were both banned, have been getting this for years. It's a tactic. As a matter of fact, any and every opponent of jihad terror and Islamic supremacism is smeared and defamed with the intention of demonizing and marginalizing us to the extent that nobody hears what we have to say. To call us anti-Muslim is like calling people who are fighting against Nazism anti-German. We stand with any Muslim who renounces jihad terror and Islamic supremacism in a sincere way and is willing to work for the freedom of speech and the freedom of conscience and the equality of rights of all people before the law. To call us anti-Muslim is already to defame us as being against a people when we are actually against an authoritarian ideology that many Muslims are in Canada and the United States because they themselves oppose.
Well, and this is part of the disturbing trend. I mean, the whole fight against Section 13 in Canada started because some young Muslim activists didn't like anyone saying anything bad about Islam, so they took on Mark Steyn. You are being banned from saying things that, well, they're quoting you, and you say you didn't use those exact words, but they're quoting you as saying something less vile than a guy they just let in. You're against it, he's for it. How bad is it getting in the United States in terms of freedom of speech and ability to speak out on this topic?
It's getting almost as bad. The Obama administration, of course, has banned any discussion of Islam and jihad in connection with terrorism. They have thereby left our intelligence agencies completely in the dark as to what they're dealing with. And we saw the fruit of that in Boston. when two governments, the Russians and the Saudis, had actually warned us about the Tsarnaev brothers and that they were involved with jihad groups, the FBI did nothing. And I think it's because they didn't know what to do. They had always been taught, ever since the Obama administration purged the material and even promised to re-educate the agents, that Islam is peaceful and that jihad is a spiritual struggle. So they hear these guys are jihadis. What's the big deal? The thing is that we're fighting against Islamization, and there are valiant secularist Egyptians and Turks right now fighting against Islamization. It's not racist and bigoted to fight against Islamization in the United States and valiant and courageous to fight against it in Egypt and Turkey. It's the same injustices everywhere that we're fighting for and fighting against in the name of human rights.
We don't have time to get into it very much, Robert, but I'll tell you this. Yet a couple of Supreme Court decisions that I think will impact freedom of speech in coming weeks, months, and years as it relates to how people talk about issues such as marriage. But certain people, once again, will be allowed to say those things, not others. Thanks for joining us today, and let us know, give us an update if something does change and you are able to go to Britain to speak truth to power.
Absolutely. We'll be appealing. Thank you.
All right.